If you look at your personal bank account, the underlying logic is, well, it's brutally simple. You withdraw more money than you deposit, and eventually the account hits zero.
Right, the bank just cuts you off.
Exactly. We all instinctively understand this math in our daily lives. But when you zoom out and look at the ocean, which is this massive, humming economic engine, I mean, it carries 80% of all global trade and generates roughly $5 trillion a year.
Which is a staggering number when you really think about it.
It is. But we suddenly act like the map doesn't apply to it. We've basically treated the global ocean economy like an ATM with a literally infinite daily withdrawal limit.
Which is a fundamental miscalculation because the natural reserve is finite. You can't just keep taking.
Right. And this brings us to what we are digging into today. The World Economic Forum just released their June 2026 Insight Report. It's called The Regenerative Blue Economy, Pathways to Prosperity, and man, the numbers they present are just stark.
Yeah, they really are. I mean, for instance, the share of overfished stocks has quadrupled since 1974.
Quadrupled, that's...
Wow. Yeah. And we are looking at a scenario where 70 to 90% of coral reefs could just vanish in 2 decades. Plus, coastal flood exposure could double by 2100. So the ocean economy is effectively cannibalizing its own foundation.
Okay, let's unpack this, because for a long time, the big buzzword has been sustainability, right?
Right. Just make things sustainable.
Exactly. The idea was to just make our industry sustainable. But reading through this WEF report, the central thesis is that sustainability is actually a dead end.
Which sounds counterintuitive at first.
It does, but they explain it so well. Saying we are managing the ocean sustainably is like looking at that draining bank account and saying, hey, good news, we are still bleeding cash, but we are doing it slightly slower now.
Right. You're still going bankrupt just, a few days later.
Exactly. The report argues we are way past the point of just slowing down withdrawals. We need a completely new blueprint where the global economy actually makes massive active deposits. We have to start earning compound interest on the ocean's health.
And that is the exact shift they are talking about, going from just doing less harm to active restoration. But you can't rewire a $5 trillion machine without understanding how the gears actually turn.
Right, you need a map.
Exactly. So the researchers categorize the entire ocean economy into 3 distinct trajectories. You have your traditional sectors, your growth sectors, and the frontier sectors.
Okay, so if we are diagnosing the problem, we have to look at the heaviest hitters first. The traditional sectors. I imagine this is like the legacy infrastructure we've relied on for decades.
Yeah, these are the absolute behemoths. We are talking offshore oil and gas, massive commercial shipping, and wild capture fisheries.
The ones employing the most people.
Exactly. They employ the most people and generate the most revenue, but they also inherently carry the largest environmental footprints.
So what's the plan there? We can't just shut them down tomorrow.
No, absolutely not. The goal for this sector isn't immediate transformation into something pristine. It is a heavily managed transition. The priority is really about forcing these industries to internalize the environmental costs that they have historically just passed on to the public.
Right, like making them pay for the mess they make.
Exactly, while drastically scaling back their physical harm.
Okay, so then we have the growth sectors. These are the areas expanding incredibly fast, right? Like offshore wind, coastal tourism, aquaculture.
Yep, all growing exponentially.
But the report also highlights wastewater treatment here, which I have to be honest, seems like an odd fit at first glance.
It does seem weird, but it's actually a prime example of the problem with our current growth models. The report notes that wastewater treatment is a $348 billion market.
That's a huge industry.
It is. But globally, only 11% of treated wastewater is currently reused.
Wait, hold on. Why is that number so low? If we are spending hundreds of billions to treat the water, why are we only reusing like a tenth of it?
The mechanism comes down to legacy infrastructure design. I mean, most coastal cities built their wastewater systems as a one-way pipe straight to the sea.
Oh, I see. Just dump it out once it's clean enough.
Right. Pumping heavy, treated water back inland to, say, agricultural farms or industrial centers requires massive energy and entirely new piping networks.
Which costs a fortune.
Exactly. So it is just cheaper to treat it to a bare minimum standard and dump it into the ocean. The warning in the report is that these growth sectors are expanding rapidly, but if they don't scale up strictly within planetary boundaries, they just become the next wave of traditional extractors.
That makes perfect sense. Which brings us to the third trajectory then. The frontier sectors. This is the new blueprint you mentioned.
Right. The frontier is where the paradigm completely flips. We're talking about blue biotechnology, advanced ocean data systems, and most importantly, ecosystem restoration operating as an actual industry.
Not just a charity project.
Exactly. This is not a charity sector. Between 2010 and 2025, the enterprise value in these frontier sectors surged from $1.1 billion to $24.7 billion.
Whoa. That is massive growth.
It's explosive. And the mechanism here is that economic success is directly defined by natural capital replenishment. The more ecosystem you restore, the more value you actually create.
Okay, to make this concrete for you listening, imagine a massive agricultural system. The traditional sectors are like the old-school factory farms spraying heavy pesticides. We just need them to stop poisoning the soil.
Right, just mitigate the damage.
Exactly. Then the growth sectors are like hydroponic warehouses. They are efficient, expanding fast, but they still consume a lot of resources.
Yeah.
But the frontier sectors, that is like an advanced permaculture food forest. The act of growing the food actually makes the topsoil richer, the water cleaner, and the surrounding ecosystem more resilient. The business model is the healing process.
That's a great way to put it. But the transition from a factory farm to permaculture doesn't happen overnight. To explain how individual actors actually navigate this, the report breaks down corporate and project behavior into 3 distinct tiers of regeneration.
Okay, so let's walk through those. Tier 1 is categorized as regenerative aligned.
Yes.
The WEF uses the Maritime and Port Authority of Singapore as the prime example here. They are targeting net zero emissions for roughly 1,600 harbor craft by 2050. And they were building out infrastructure for alternative fuels like ammonia and methanol.
Right, which is huge. Changing the base infrastructure of one of the world's busiest global hubs is a massive logistical undertaking. They are basically laying the groundwork for the shipping industry to decarbonize.
I have to push back here, though.
Oh.
Putting the word regenerative next to a massive shipping port feels like a bit of a stretch.
I know what you mean.
Like, is Tier 1 just a slick new corporate rebrand for greenwashing? I mean, if a fleet of harbor craft switches to methanol, yeah, they are polluting less. But they aren't actively putting fish back in the sea. They are still making withdrawals, just not using a bulldozer to do it. How is that actually regenerative?
That's a totally fair point, and the report actually anticipates this exact critique. Tier 1 is explicitly not the finish line. It is just the mandatory entry point.
Okay, so it's step 1.
Right. The logic is that you cannot physically begin to regenerate an ecosystem if you are simultaneously dumping toxins or excess carbon into it. Establishing a strict do-no-harm baseline is the prerequisite. Think of a medical emergency. You have to stop the arterial bleeding before you can even begin physical therapy. Tier 1 is the tourniquet.
Okay. Patch the hole in the hull before you bail the water. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And that leads directly to Tier 2, which is regenerative operational.
Exactly. This is where the core business starts generating net improvements in natural capital.
So what's an example of that in the real world?
Well, Vattenfall's Holland's Kust Zuid offshore wind farm in the North Sea is the standout case study for this tier.
Okay.
It is a 1.5 gigawatt project developed entirely without direct government subsidies. But what makes it Tier 2 is the nature-inclusive design mechanism.
Nature-inclusive design. What does that mean for a wind farm?
So offshore wind traditionally involves dropping massive steel and concrete monopiles into the ocean, which really disrupts the seafloor. But Vattenfall redesigned the turbine foundations with these elliptical openings to allow water exchange and provide shelter for marine species.
Oh, that's clever.
Yeah. They also installed artificial rock reefs at the base of the turbines to basically increase habitat complexity.
So the business is selling electricity. But the mechanism of generating that electricity creates a localized marine sanctuary.
Exactly. The operation itself is a net positive for local biodiversity. They are creating complex habitats where there previously were none, all while operating a highly commercially viable energy project.
Wow. Okay, then we reach Tier 3, regenerative native. This is the permaculture forest we talked about.
Right.
Systems that are entirely self-sustaining and ecosystem enhancing. The example in the report is the Sea Ranger service in Amsterdam.
Which is a fascinating project.
It really is. They recruit 18 to 29-year-olds from coastal communities, specifically targeting demographics with high youth unemployment, and they train them in maritime and ecological fieldwork.
Yeah, and they sail on low-emission vessels.
Right. And their actual day-to-day business is planting tens of thousands of seagrass cores. Their goal is to restore 1 million hectares of ocean biodiversity by 2040.
And that distinction is vital. Vattenfall is an energy company that helps the ocean on the side. The Sea Ranger service is an ocean restoration company that just happens to make money.
Right, restoration is the product.
Exactly. However, the report cautions that Tier 3 is still highly aspirational for the bulk of the global economy. The immediate pragmatic imperative is leveraging the massive traditional actors, the Tier 1s, and pushing them into Tier 2 operational models.
I mean, that makes sense. A wind farm with elliptical foundations is fantastic. A sailing crew planting seagrass is inspiring. But if we zoom out, these are isolated pilot projects in a massive interconnected ocean.
Very true.
You can't just sprinkle a few wind farms and expect a $5 trillion economy to pivot. The WEF outlines 4 systemic levers that have to be pulled simultaneously to force this transition.
Right, and governance is the first lever, because the historical approach to ocean management is highly fragmented.
How so?
While a fisheries department issues quotas, a tourism board promotes coastal development, and an energy ministry leases offshore oil tracts, and they rarely talk to each other.
Yeah, that sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It is. So the report advocates for something called polycentric seascape governance.
Okay, jargon alert. What does polycentric seascape governance actually mean when you are standing on a beach?
Fair question. It means treating a massive, ecologically connected marine area as a single, indivisible system managed by multiple overlapping authorities.
Okay, do we have an example of that working?
We do. The Bird's Head Seascape in Indonesia illustrates this perfectly. It covers 225,000 square kilometers of hyper-biodiverse ocean.
That is massive.
Huge. And over 2 decades, they didn't just impose top-down conservation zones from the capital. Local communities, regional governments, and NGOs all collaborated to map out a 52,000 square kilometer network of protected areas.
Wow, so getting everyone at the same table.
Exactly. And a key mechanism was formally recognizing customary tenure. Basically, the historical rights of indigenous and local people to manage their own waters. They then tied tourism entrance fees directly to conservation enforcement and local community development.
Okay, so the governance lever sets the rules, but it doesn't function without the second lever, which is finance.
Always comes back to the money.
Always.
Yeah.
We know the ocean generates trillions, but the report points out that less than 1% of the ocean economy's value is actually reinvested in sustainability.
Which is a terrifying gap.
Yeah. And to bridge that gap, we need mechanisms like sovereign blue bonds and debt-for-nature swaps. Like Ecuador recently completed a $1.1 billion debt conversion for the Galapagos.
And the scale of that transaction is historic, but the mechanics of how a debt-for-nature swap works are what really make it such a powerful tool.
Yeah, walk me through the math on that. How exactly does a sovereign nation pay off international debt by protecting coral reefs?
Sure. Let's say a developing coastal nation owes $1 billion to international creditors at a really high interest rate. That debt burden forces them to over-extract their natural resources just to make the interest payments.
Right, they have to fish more just to pay the bank.
Exactly. So in a swap, an international NGO or coalition of banks steps in and offers to buy that debt at a discount. In exchange, the nation issues a new blue bond at a much lower interest rate.
So the country's debt becomes significantly cheaper to service.
Yes. But the critical condition is what happens to the savings. The hundreds of millions of dollars saved by that lower interest rate are legally ring-fenced. The country is contractually obligated to spend those specific savings on their own marine conservation. Like in this case, protecting the Galapagos Marine Reserve.
Oh, wow. So the creditors get paid back, the country lowers its debt burden, and the local ecosystem receives guaranteed long-term funding.
Exactly. Everyone wins.
That is an incredibly elegant financial instrument. But the report raises a massive red flag regarding ocean finance, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Even with blue bonds, the capital rarely reaches the people actually living on the coast. Indigenous peoples and local communities, or IPLCs, are systematically bypassed.
Yeah, it's a huge blind spot. Small-scale fisheries support roughly 500 million people globally and provide at least 40% of the global marine catch.
40%.
Yeah. They are the frontline stewards of the ecosystem. Yet, formal finance and government subsidies consistently flow to large industrial actors. If dedicated financing windows don't channel capital directly to local communities, the entire regenerative blueprint just collapses.
And that ties directly into the third lever, human capacity. We can't view ocean literacy or local institutional knowledge as just an afterthought.
No, it is core infrastructure.
Right, because if you drop $1 billion into a region, but the local institutions don't have the training or the organizational muscle to deploy it effectively, the money just evaporates.
It absolutely does. And that brings us to the final lever, which is technology and artificial intelligence. The report explores using environmental DNA, or eDNA. Researchers can scoop a liter of seawater and analyze the genetic material to detect exactly which species are present without ever dropping a net.
That sounds like science fiction.
I know, it's incredible. They also highlight autonomous uncrewed surface vehicles that can patrol vast marine protected areas, and AI algorithms processing satellite imagery to flag illegal fishing fleets going dark.
Now, we hear so much hype about AI saving the planet these days, but the report is surprisingly grounded about the actual role of technology here.
Very grounded. If we connect this to the bigger picture, technology is an enabler, not a savior. I mean, an AI drone cannot arrest an illegal fishing vessel, right?
Right.
And an eDNA sensor cannot negotiate a multi-million-dollar blue bond. The function of technology is simply to make the governance and finance levers cheaper to operate and easier to monitor. You cannot manage a seascape if you cannot verify what is happening in it. Tech just turns an opaque, invisible ocean into actionable data.
I like to think of this as a living body. Technology is the nervous system gathering data. Governance is the brain making decisions. Finance is the lifeblood keeping it moving. And human capacity is the muscle doing the actual heavy lifting.
That is a perfect analogy.
So we have the blueprint. We know the sectors, we know the difference between patching a hole and building a permaculture forest, and we know the 4 levers to pull. The obvious question is, why aren't we doing this globally right now?
Well, the report breaks the current reality down into forces propelling us forward, the tailwinds, and forces pushing us back, the headwinds.
Okay, start with the good news. What are the tailwinds?
The tailwinds actually provide some serious momentum. Geopolitically, the ocean is taking center stage because superpowers are realizing its critical role in global climate regulation. And as we discussed, the cost of satellite and AI monitoring is just plummeting. We are also seeing the rise of catalytic capital.
Wait, what is the mechanism behind catalytic capital?
It is essentially blended finance designed to absorb initial risk. So a government or philanthropic foundation provides an initial grant to a new, unproven regenerative project.
Okay.
Because that initial money acts as a buffer against failure, traditional private investors, who are usually very risk-averse, feel safe enough to jump in. The initial grant basically catalyzes a much larger wave of private funding.
Got it. But arguably the strongest tailwind is the formal legal recognition of small-scale and indigenous stewardship, right? Empowering the people who have managed these coastlines for generations.
Yes, absolutely. But the storm clouds are massive. The headwinds are fighting back hard.
Yeah, I imagine the traditional sectors aren't just rolling over.
Exactly. Multilateralism is fracturing. Countries are struggling to cooperate on basic trade, let alone managing international waters. And we are seeing intense competing demands for ocean space.
Right. The physical space is becoming a battleground. You have offshore wind developers trying to build turbines in the exact same waters that industrial fishing fleets want to trawl.
While conservationists are fighting to declare the whole area a protected sanctuary.
It's a mess.
And underwriting all of this friction is misaligned mainstream finance. The vast majority of capital still actively rewards extraction.
Yeah, the report points out that harmful fisheries subsidies still total around $22 billion a year.
Which is madness. The global economy is literally paying industrial fleets to empty the ocean. Political pressure keeps these massive operations afloat by subsidizing fuel and shipbuilding. It artificially lowers the cost of dragging a net across a dying seafloor.
And looming over all of this economic friction are the hard climate thresholds, warming seas and ocean acidification. You can design a brilliant Tier 3 restoration company, deploy catalytic capital, and plant 1 million coral fragments. But if the global ocean temperature spikes, that coral will just bleach.
Right. The ecological thresholds threaten to outpace our ability to implement these governance and finance levers.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because this whole massive trillion-dollar economic theory crashes directly into your daily life. When we talk about global headwinds and debt-for-nature swaps, it feels really abstract.
Oh, absolutely.
You might be listening to this in a landlocked city, wondering how polycentric seascape governance affects your morning commute. But you are intimately tied to this tug-of-war, the smartphone you are holding. Its components traveled across that contested ocean space on ships navigating those exact fuel transitions. Your coastal vacations, the cost of your property insurance as weather systems destabilize, the seafood at your local market. Every single touch point is dictated by whether the extractive headwinds or the regenerative tailwinds win out.
The connection is absolute. And it circles back to a concept the report insists is the bedrock of the entire transition: recognitional equity.
What does that mean in practice?
It means we cannot engineer our way out of this from boardrooms in landlocked financial capitals. Acknowledging the pre-existing rights and the profound generational knowledge of coastal peoples is mandatory. Without local community-level stewardship fully embedded into those finance and governance levers, the ecosystem simply will not recover.
Because the people living on the coastlines are the ones who actually see the tide changing. They're the ones whose local economies collapse first when the bank account finally hits zero.
Exactly. The historical ocean economy asks one fundamental question: how much value can we extract from this water before the system fundamentally breaks?
But the regenerative blueprint completely inverts that logic. It asks, how can our economic activity, our shipping routes, our energy grids, our food production actively heal the systems we are relying on? It is moving from acting as a parasite to building a true symbiotic relationship.
Because a thriving coastal community and a healthy marine ecosystem are not competing objectives against economic growth. They are the absolute prerequisites for it. I mean, a dead ocean produces zero GDP.
Which brings us back to that bank account we opened with. We have spent centuries making reckless withdrawals. Sustainability was just the world promising to spend slightly less. Regeneration is the harsh realization that if we don't start making massive compounding deposits into the natural systems that generate our wealth, the bank isn't just going to bounce our checks, it is going to close the doors permanently.
The required shift demands a total rewiring of how we measure value.
So as you go about your day, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. Right now, our primary global economic metric, GDP, only measures the wealth we successfully extract, process, and sell. A dead fish caught in a net adds to GDP. A living, functioning coral reef supposedly has zero economic value until you charge a tourist to snorkel over it.
Which is a completely flawed accounting system.
It is. So what if we flip the global accounting standards? How would the entire world economy violently shift overnight if every nation and corporation was legally forced to carry a massive negative balance sheet value for all the natural ocean capital they have degraded but haven't yet restored? If the debt to nature was finally called in, who would be bankrupt tomorrow and who would be incredibly wealthy?
Changing the math changes the entire world.
It really does. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you on the next one.